I have always written and been really moody. And so that's kind of lent itself well to being a writer. But I super went left in my schooling. I in terms of this trajectory, I didn't study creative writing in school. I didn't study poetry. I didn't do anything in that regard. I stuck to a pretty hard humanities background. And so I wanted to be a diplomat at the UN and I wanted to, wear a blazer to work and get up at 9 in the morning. And I've deviated from that and I'm so grateful that I have because I think that a lot of what I was doing was kind of sheltering in academia, because I was too scared to be creative, even though I wanted to. I started going to readings at KGB Bar and hosting my own. And things just flowed really naturally from there. I found that I just developed a lot of really incredible relationships from that scene.
Is that out right now? Are you still running the reading series?
So I run a monthly reading series at Honey's in Bushwick. It's on a Monday. It floats on a Monday every month, and I've been doing that for 2 years. And um, Honey's, they're so incredible there. And then I'm starting one next month. It's at Betty on the Lower East Side. So I'll kind of have a Brooklyn one and a Manhattan one, and that's exciting.
Yeah. Do you find you normally get like the same people every single time that you do it, or is it like a little bit of a refresher of new faces?
It really depends on the lineup. I think it depends on who's coming to see who, but I try to have diverse lineups insofar as I don't typically recycle people too often. And I try to bring in people who don't identify as writers or poets because I think that that can often yield a really refreshing and unexpected performance.
Yeah.
So people that maybe are graffiti artists or people that maybe edit a magazine and haven't written their own stuff yet, like an anecdote from their lives or take a poem they wrote in high school. And
So for odd lots, I really like the line, "What did drugstore plastic nails say about human nature?"
I'm super interested in um, how our external environment shapes our desires. And so there's this concept called mimetic desire. And it's about, the things that we consume and the things that we see, we reflexively develop desire around. Um, and so I noticed that, when I'm working or when I'm presenting in a certain way and I have these little plastic objects glued to the top of my nails, I'm I'm myself more of an object of desire. And I just find that so radically arbitrary and fascinating. And I'm sure, like everything else, there's some kind of evolutionary component to that, and there's some kind of biological blah 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 blah. Mostly, I think these markers that we ascribe to be desirous or become so morphed. Um, and ultimately are passing trends, with we can see it with, filler or certain kind of ways to present one's face that involves some form of body modification really is culturally contingent.
Do you feel like writing about those topics has impacted your own relationship with femininity and relationship with these beauty standards?
When I'm my most honest when I'm writing, it feels yeah, it feels a little raw. Um, I've written considering writing more about, age and age play in sexual encounters. And that's something that I'm a little bit avoidant on the topic of, which is how I know that it's gonna yield some cool poems. At a reading, it's like the thing that makes a reading different is the corporeality of the performance. It's you're looking at the person. And so what they're saying takes on is mediated through their presence. And so I find that, when I'm at a reading, I'd rather read something that engages with myself as a physical object, rather than just something off the page that maybe works better on the page.
Oh, I was also going to ask you about December New York because I really like that poem. First of all, I was going to ask if there's really a Lisa Frank pocket knife because I feel like that's not real, is it?
Somewhere in the deep recesses of eBay, I found her.
That's real. That's crazy. Was it?
Yeah, you can find anything on the internet.
Okay. And then I was interested in the line of you were quoting Walt Whitman directly after the line, I shake my ass to the DJ on TV. And I liked that. I think that switch was really interesting to me. It really stuck in my head. Do you find that you tend to do things like that a lot when you're writing, where you're creating a very modern image and then you're kind of cutting it with like, say, academia or something that's a little bit more concrete?
I really love using what's I'm consuming in literature at the time. I usually toggle between fiction and nonfiction. Um, and when I write poems for readings, or the poems that come the fastest and the most naturally are the ones that I'm just kind of existing in the world and picking up things, that are happening and things that I'm reading. So that kind of intertextuality is really nice. And then to bring, an incredible writer like Whitman and then have it be contextualized through like hyper modernity, I find I find it interesting, and so much of art is just creative stealing. And so finding a way to incorporate other people's words in your own words is super fun and something that's been done since the dawn of time.
I was gonna ask you about. I feel like to me that stanza kind of reminds me of like as a poet, it reminds me of these universal truths that I feel as a female writer, kind of this act of stepping into the role of the modern woman day to day. And then when working in academia or when working in classical writing, you're kind of pushing that part of yourself away, especially because you didn't study creative writing. Did you say you studied history? Is that what you went to school for?
Yeah, I studied history.
Yeah. So did you feel kind of like a pull against that modern woman look when you were trying to be a poet originally? Like, did you want to do kind of more classical poetry that's a little bit more kind of serious, I guess?
That's interesting. I, you know, I think that when I started writing poetry, I was very, very skeptical of autofiction. And I was very skeptical of what I saw at the time cynically as kind of navel gazy poems that always reference the I and always are thinly veiled memoir. And sometimes, what we are resentful of or think is and a big eye roll is really what we want to do ourselves, and you're just a little too scared. And so I think I just leaned into that as a form of expression. That being said, I do think a lot of autofiction is very self-indulgent because it's not it has to for a poem to be successful, and it doesn't have to do with whether it uses I or not. It just has to transcend um transcend transcription and become craft. It can't just transcribing one's life unless it that is the craft and it's its own genre. Um, that's not that's I don't think that's art. So to make you can make memoir in poetry elevated. It just has to you have to move slow enough to think about the words and to bring gravity to the subject in a way that's using language and that's ultimately about language. And so yeah, I really was skeptical of a lot of the stuff that I do right
I
now.
feel like your I in your poetry is usually a direct, like I know we're kind of always writing in this character, it's never a true I, but when you're writing your poetry, do you feel like you're really writing yourself as the I, or are you kind of building a character around what you're saying?
I think I'm building a character around the I in my life. I think that every version that I am in relation to another is fiction. I'm not an authentic person in relation to other people because I don't believe in that. I think that everyone is presenting a version of themselves, and it can be done in an authentic mode and still be, not a direct reflection of one's ultimate self. And so, I mean, that's more kind of ontological, but I do think that when I'm writing in the I, often I'm trying to tease out the really unlikable, unpalatable versions of whatever the I actually is in my own life, because I think that I like I think it's interesting to test an audience and people's appetite for um unlikability, I think is concerningly low because generally people aren't necessarily able to separate the art from the artist. And I think this is why I really in school found the creative writing classes, the very minimal ones that I took, to be totally infuriating because I think that creating an unlikable narrator is something that is really valuable because it can be an act of um, self-investigation in a way that just creating this, interesting set, ego and or super ego narrator doesn't really do.
I'm gonna ask you about the Office magazine article because I thought that was really interesting. How much truth do you feel like exists behind the picture of the New York literary scene that the author painted? And does it feel accurate to you, or did some of it feel a little bit glamorized or a little bit kind of played up for journalism?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think that's very true to Sammy's experience, and I think that Sammy did a super fun job in taking us through a scene. Um, I think that there's a lot of there. It's really funny. These micro subcultures become a world into themselves, and what can feel really niche takes on these gargantuan proportions in one's life when they're steeped in it. And it's funny, I think that speaks to just existing in New York, the social milieu that one finds oneself in feels like the only thing, and then you go 10 blocks away and enter a club and you don't know anyone around, and it's so humbling. Because there's just 100 million scenes for every whatever 1 block radius or whatever you're into, you're gonna find. But I thought Sammy did a nice job threading through some true to life community.
Yeah, it felt really vivid. I think that's true about subgroups, particularly, especially where like you can see such a difference in the same exact type of subgroup in different cities. Even how he was saying like LA to New York, or where I'm in Vancouver, where literary scenes exist and they're on paper the same thing that say you're doing in New York, but they're so different based on where you are and based on the ages of the people. And you're so right though. So much of these subgroups that exist are they're there in like that one venue, and then as soon as you leave and you're not with the same people or the wrong people are there that day, it's like it's a whole different place. It's so interesting.
Yeah, I was in Vancouver.
Vancouver's funny. We have like a big art scene, but that's about it. Like our literary is it's pretty tiny, but it's interesting. Yeah. So what is next for you? What are you doing now? I know you said you're starting another literary reading, right?
So I'm starting a new reading series at Betty in the Lower East Side. And I want to think about how I can really differentiate that from the Brooklyn one. It's been about a year since I've been bi-coastal, living between New York and LA, so I'm gonna keep that up and sleep as much as I can. And I have a book forthcoming through Far West Press, and that'll be out sometime in the early spring.
That's
And
great.
I'm excited about that. I think that they're a press that's doing a lot of really amazing things. They've published, talented Parker Love Bowling and a bunch of cool heads. So I feel really grateful to be part of their upcoming new authors.